All right. Throughout the history of what is now known as the church, the idea of pitting grace in opposition to the law was toyed with here and there. Um, Surely with Marcion and Origen, it was toyed with. Came up a time or two during the Dark Ages, but truly, the idea to live by grace in opposition to the law of God is a 20th century invention. We do not find full acceptance of this idea until the 1900s. During the Middle Ages, there were a number of uprisings by the Christians. Well, yeah, no, when did I say that? Middle Ages. It was really more Catholic than Christian, but the Christians certainly participated in this in the latter part of the Dark Ages. But anyway, these groups of people would storm the Catholic churches and destroy the graven images. In a lot of cases, all they did was tear off the nose because that to them in the time totally desecrated the idol. These images were idols that the Catholics prayed to, and even some of the Christians early on, and perhaps to this day, I don't know. To especially they pray to Mary, but among the Catholics, if you want protection, you pray to the patron saint of protection. If you wanted fertility, pray to you literally prayed to the saint. You didn't ask God, you asked the saint. And generally, when it came time to ask God, you didn't ask God, you asked the mother of God because, she has favor and whatnot. Okay. It is clear that the teaching that the Old Testament passed away and the New Testament took its place had not yet taken hold among believers. Otherwise, they in this time period, the Dark Ages, while the tearing up of the idols was going on, if it had, they would have had no problem with the idols in the church, given that this was an Old Testament law. So I don't know if I muddied that up or what. What I'm saying is it's clear that the teaching that the Old Testament passed away and the New Testament took its place, it had not yet taken hold during the Dark Ages, because if it had, they wouldn't have gone into the churches and broken the idols, because that law is from the Old Testament. When the Puritans moved to the New World, that would be America, they set up the laws of this nation according to the Old Testament, not the New. During the 1700s, people were not allowed to smile on Sunday. I'm not kidding you. They were not allowed to talk above a whisper. They weren't even allowed to kiss or hug in public. Sailors were actually arrested and put in the stocks for doing this kind of thing. George Washington, the first president of the United States, he was actually arrested and detained for riding his horse at a gallop on Sunday during the war. Please consider the following quotes from some of our most famous church leaders. Martin Luther, who lived from 1483 to 1546, said, "The first duty of the gospel preacher is to declare God's law and to show the nature of sin, because it will act as a schoolmaster and bring him to everlasting life, which is in Jesus Christ." So Martin Luther obviously believed that if you learn the law and live by it, it would be the schoolmaster that would lead you to eternal life through Jesus Christ. Doesn't sound very Christian, does it? At least not modern. John Wesley, who lived from 1636 to 1678, said, "Before I preach love, mercy, and grace, I must preach sin, law, and judgment." He also said, "Preach 90% law and 10% grace." Now, Charles Finney, who lived from 1792 to 1875, said, "Evermore the law must prepare the way for the gospel." The law must prepare the way for the gospel. To overlook this in instructing souls is almost certain to result in false hope, the introduction of a false standard of Christian experience, and to fill the church with false converts. Yeah. Charles Spurgeon, who lived from 1834 to 1892, said, "They will never accept grace until they tremble before a just and holy law." We know that God never changes, and we know that not one jot or tittle will pass from God's word, don't we? I'm not real sure we do. Why do Christians now believe the exact opposite of what they believed from the very beginning all the way through the end of the 1800s? Why are Christians so afraid of the law? Why do they call it legalism, bondage, or works? Let's take a look at some of these laws. I'm following I'll go through the first 20 or so of the laws as laid out by Maimonides. He gives the first law that he gives of God is to know Yahweh as your God. And he's, of course, taking that from Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, which says, "I, Yahweh, your God, that brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the dwelling place of an imposed servitude." So first Yahweh reveals himself to you, then he delivers you from the land of forced servitude, your personal Egypt, if you will, but he will never stop you from going back and volunteering to live out the rest of your life back in Egypt. We saw that, right? Those who wanted to go back went back or died trying. This isn't really a law, and you're not commanded that you must love God. It's poor translation. It's something that broke down over time. The Puritans saw God in a very negative way. And they're the ones that give you the King James Bible, by the way. And so everything was very negative. And they actually believed that at Mount Sinai, when the Jews built the calf, it was so upsetting to God that God turned his back at that point and left mankind to its own devices. And that's how they explained away all the bad stuff still going on in the world to this day, or to their day. Yeah, not so much. What this is saying, to put it rightly, is that if you will live out your life according to God's law, you will know Yahweh, your God. Which is also to say, if you don't, you won't know Yahweh, your God. The second law was to know that our God, Yahweh, is the only one. He's the only God. There is no other God. And he takes that from Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear with your ears, and this is my translation, by the way. It's my kind of blown up Uber translation. I don't know what to call it. Flowery translation. There we go. Hear with your ears, understand with your whole heart and mind, and then act upon what you've heard, right? O Israel. So it just says Shema, that's to hear. We would just say, "Hear, O Israel." But in Hebrew, to hear, Shema, is to hear with the ears physically. You had to actually hear the words. Then you had to understand it with your whole heart and mind. Now you understand, in the biblical world, the heart, the mind, the soul were all one thing. They weren't three bullet points that you taught in a message. They were all the same thing. So if your heart said yes and your mind said no, you were suffering from schizophrenia. Because the heart, the mind, the soul, that was all one and the same, right? But if in order for you to hear, though, in order for you to Shema, which is the word that was used in Hebrew, you had to hear it, you had to understand it, and you had to act upon it. My favorite example is I'm standing up here talking or sitting here talking, whatever the case may be, and I say to somebody in the audience, "I am parched." Okay. If everybody in the audience just sits there and stares at me, nobody heard me in the biblical world. Somebody has to act on what they've heard. They have to have heard me say I'm parched, and then they have to understand what that means. They know that I'm thirsty. And then they have to act on it. They either have to say, well, get off your lazy bohonkus and get in there and get you something to drink. Or they have to get up and go get you something to drink and bring it to you, right? They have to act on it. It doesn't have to be positive. It doesn't have to be negative for that matter. It just has, you have to act on it. If you haven't done one of the three things, you haven't heard. So that's why when you read some translations of this verse, some say obey. Think about it. You heard it with your ear. You understood it with your whole heart and mind. And this is a command. So your acting on it would be what? Obedience. So they're not saying different things. They're just picking different parts of the meaning and using the one word for the one word. There's only one word, Shema. And so instead of writing, hear with your ears, understand with your whole heart and mind, and then act upon what you've heard, they just say hear or obey. So it says, hear, O Israel, Yisrael. Funny, it didn't say hear, O church. Hear, O people who will take away, who will take over the Judaism. No, it's here, Yisrael. He's talking to Israel, the children of Israel, the Jews. Hear, Jews. Then it says, Yahweh, Yahweh Elohecha, Yahweh, our God. So God, Yahweh, God, belong to who's hearing? Israel. It's the God of the Jews. Just like it said when he was hanging on the cross above his head, Yeshua, God of the King of the Jews. Get it? This is the guy we're talking about when we say Yahweh. Hear Yisrael. Obey Yisrael. Understand Yisrael. Yahweh, our God, the God of the Jews. Yahweh is Echad. He is the only one. And there are those who are going around trying to make a trinity out of that. Oops, I pushed a button I shouldn't have. They're trying to make a trinity out of it, right? Because Echad is one by the joining of many. And so they say many is three. Okay, so if you have none, three could be considered many, I suppose. But if this guy has three and that guy has 4,000, is three still going to be many? Come on. What is the joining? It's not the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It's not Trinitarian. It's two or more because it's plural, right? But what we're talking about here is the attributes of God. It's all of the attributes of God that make him one God, that make him one powerful God. It's his righteousness, his holiness, his just, being just, his provision, and on and on and on it goes. Those are not God's names. Those are God's attributes. And you add all of that up, you twist all of that together, and then you have the one and only God that has all those attributes. Because you cannot show in any way, shape, or form that some piece of wood that I carved out with a happy face on it has any of those attributes, except for happiness. And I don't know if that's really an attribute, since it's just a piece of wood. So there's only one. Only one. Not three. Not a multiplicity. Just one God. God is one by the joining of many attributes. Way too many for us to ever tell you what they all are. But there's a pretty long list of them. Just get those ones that say, books that say the names of God, and just scratch out the word name and put attributes up there. And then you start to understand it's all of those things bound together that makes him the one powerful God. Very different from all the other gods. Think about it. All the other gods only had one attribute. One was the God of love, and one was the God of anger, and one was the God of the sun, and one was the God of growing plants, and the God of this, that, right? They all had very few attributes. But this one God, this God that is one by the joining of all of those attributes, that's Yahweh. And he belongs to the Jews, by the way. That's what it says in Deuteronomy 6:4. Now, the third law is to love Yahweh your God with every fiber of your being. Every fiber of your being. Deuteronomy 6:5. You will desire And remember, this is my flowery version. You will desire, breathe after, long for, be inclined to an intimate with Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with absolutely everything that is within you. God is not telling us what we have to do, people. He is telling us what will happen to those of us who choose to live in covenant with Him, which is to live our lives according to the Torah, because the Torah is the covenant. So let me ask you, we've gone over 3 laws at this point. They're all about what's going to happen to us, the love of God that we're going to feel in our lives if we live according to God's law. Where is the legalism? Law number 4, to quiver with joy and reverence of Yahweh your God. To quiver. It's from Deuteronomy 6:13. You shall quiver with joy and reverence of Yahweh your God, and take on his imposed servitude, and shall make an oath by his authority. Oh, now we may find some bondage here. We are not to live our lives in fear of what God can do to us if we do or do not do what he wants. We are to live our lives quivering for joy and anticipation of what he is going to do to us, because we're living according to his law. So where's the legalism here? We certainly find some bondage here. If we're not the slave of Yahweh God, we are the slave of this world. Those are the only 2 choices you truly have. There are no other alternatives. You will live in bondage to God, or you will live in bondage to whatever that thing is you call the devil. You will serve. And you actually get to choose whom you will serve, God or hell. Because all it's going to be is hell. Oh, I tried to serve God, and all I got was hell. Were you really living by God's law, or did you pick 2 or 3 things? You wore fringe, you went to a service every once in a while, you went to a Sukkot once, a celebration of Sukkot once or twice. Really? Really? People, this is all about love. And God is the creator of this world. If he says we're to be his servants, then we need to serve. And get over yourself. Verse 5. To take on Yahweh's imposed servitude. To take his yoke upon you. Ooh, that should spark a memory to the Christians. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. It's from Exodus 23:25. And servitude will be imposed upon you. And you will work for Yahweh your God. I will bless your food, he says, if you do this, and your water. And I will cause sickness to turn away from the midst of you. Boy, if there's anything we've seen over the years in learning to live according to God's law, even just a little bit, is sickness being driven from us. Everything from emotional to physical. Before we started this, I was having heart trouble and all that stuff, had no way to go to a doctor and get anything done about it. No sooner we start living according to 1 or 2 little laws, and all of a sudden, the surgeries that I couldn't get before, they were calling me saying, hey, go get your back fixed. Hey, the day I had the really, I guess, the bad heart attack and all that was the day that I went to the VA to get assigned a doctor, passed out right in the lobby. But I was already in. And they put me in a this was a clinic, it wasn't a hospital, so they put me in an ambulance and sent me down to the nearest hospital where I had open heart surgery. And you know what? The VA paid for it. It didn't cost us a dime. And all we were living by was just a few little laws. We didn't know them all. We didn't know exactly what we were doing, right? It is incredible. And you guys remember LJ, his legs were so bowed he could barely even walk. They straightened his legs out. And now he's off the welfare and working for a living. It's incredible. Just a little bit. What do you think is going to happen when we get to the end of this thing? I'm just saying. So we need to keep in mind that there is bondage in the Bible. We will do what God tells us, or we will not hear him say, well done. The sixth law that Maimonides gives is to become one with Yahweh as his bride. Oh, this is terrible. You guys just throw away the Old Testament and live by the New, right? What? Deuteronomy 10:20. You will quiver in reverence and joy of Yahweh your God, and take on his imposed servitude, and attach yourself and adhere firmly to him, becoming one with him as his bride, and you will make an oath by his authority. Wow. To cleave to him is to become one flesh. In other words, to become his bride. Of course, you are going to quiver with joy and anticipation of Yahweh if you do that. That's what happens when relationships become intimate. Where? Somebody tell me where is the legalism? The seventh law is to swear our allegiance to Yahweh and to him alone. It comes from Deuteronomy 6:13. You will quiver in reverence and joy of Yahweh your God, and take on his imposed servitude, and make an oath, a pledge, an allegiance, and promise by his authority. We swear by nothing in this world, not by a book, not by a denomination, not by a creed, not by a custom or declaration of any kind. We swear our allegiance to Yahweh and to him alone. Where is the legalism? The eighth one is to live your life following and imitating Yahweh's course of life. Wow, follow God's course of life? That seems like a big thing, right? It comes from Deuteronomy 28:9. Yahweh will make you stand fast as a pure, clean, sin-free people to himself, as he has sworn to you with sacrifices, pledges, and oaths, if you will keep. Watch and guard, tend to, observe and preserve the commands, precepts, and foundations of Yahweh your God, and live out the totality of your lives following and imitating his course of life. You know, keeping God's commandments and walking on his path, which is the Torah, is the same thing. They're not different. Keeping his commandments is how we walk on his path. This is not legalism. It is the path to peace and joy. The ninth one Maimonides points out, Yahweh is to be pure, sacred, and set apart in the midst of his people. It comes from Leviticus 22:32. You will not pierce through, wound, or lay open my holy, set apart authority. And I will be pure, sacred, and set apart in the midst of the children of Israel. I am Yahweh, who makes you pure, sacred, and set apart. When we live a lifestyle of disobedience to God's Torah, we rip, tear, and lay open the authority he has over us. It is only through a lifestyle of obedience that God is honored. And it is in this place that God's purity and holiness is seen by all. The 10th one is to teach the Torah to our children, morning and night. It comes from Deuteronomy 6:7. And you shall teach them, the Torah, of course, you shall teach them persistently, earnestly, impressing, instilling, and indoctrinating your children, and shall set in order, leading, guiding words that direct, bring to order and subdue them, when you dwell in your homes, and in the path that you follow in life, and in the way you live out your life, and in your times of rest, and in the times you stand fast. We are to teach the laws of God to our children when we are relaxing in our homes. The law of God should be the last thing we talk about before they go to sleep and the first thing we talk about when they wake up in the morning. Man, think how different this world would be if everybody did that. Just that. The 11th law is to indoctrinate our children persistently, repeatedly, and influentially. It's from Deuteronomy 6:7. And you shall teach them. We're teaching them the Torah persistently, earnestly. And we've already had it, right? It's another law from the same verse. Because the other one was 6:7. This is 6:7. You'll teach them persistently, earnestly, impressing, instilling, and indoctrinating your children. You know, if you don't raise your children, if we don't raise our children, the resistance will. If we don't teach our children the law of God, the resistance will teach them the law of sin and death. That's not legalism. We're trying to protect our children. That's not legalistic. By the way, teaching them the law, this is how you train your children in the path that they should follow in life. It is the only way you can be sure that when your children are old, long after you are gone, they will not depart from this path. Not just your children, but to the generations that follow them as well. You know, raise up your children in the way that they ought to go. The way. What is the way? It's Torah. When God was at Sinai with his people, he gave them a verbal covenant. They agreed to live by that covenant. So Moshe goes up the hill and he begins, they begin the process of getting the thing all chiseled in stone and all that kind of stuff. And while that's all going on, the people decide to make a calf and worship it. Whew. And what did God say? They have turned quickly from the way. The way. The Torah, the thing that they had just agreed to live by, the thing that was being chiseled in stone right there and then, the way is the Torah. So if you're going to raise them in the way that they ought to go, you're raising them in the Torah. So no, raising them in church will not help you. If there was anything I learned from so many years of my life in the Pentecostal Holiness Church, was that dragging your kids to church. I had preachers used to love to say, when I was growing up, I had a drug problem. My mother drugged me to every service, drugged me to church every time the doors were open. And everybody laughed. Ha, ha, ha. And these same people talk about how their brother was drugged to the church every time the doors were open, just like they were, and their brother went away and never came back. How many women did I see growing up whose kids never, ever came back because they hated the church so badly by the time they were adults? That's not the way. Taking them to church is not the way. Taking them to a synagogue is not necessarily the way. If that synagogue is dancing around the Torah like most of them do that I've ever encountered, the child is not going to learn the way. We have to teach them the law, or we're not showing them the way. And when they're older, they probably will depart from this and never find their way back. And whose fault is that going to be? The 12th law is to bind the laws of God like a belt to your head. In other words, to secure your mind with them. It comes from Deuteronomy 6:8. And you will join together, and partner with them, the laws, for a token of guidance. And they will be as a belt between your eyes. This scripture was not to be taken literally, people. It was idiomatic. The idea was in bringing stability to the mind, the seat of the affections and emotions, by knowing God's law. In doing so, there will be less battles to fight, because if you know the law of God, you will be able to say, when that battle comes along, you'll be able to say, it is written. And we have a good example from a very good rabbi that this is how we get through those battles. But you can't say it is written if you don't know what was written, right? Now, yes, the Yehudim took this literally. Why? It didn't happen until they were Hellenized. They came from a world where their first language was Greek, not Hebrew. The vast majority of them in the first century didn't even speak Hebrew. And so they grew up with a language that was very literal. Everything was right down to its very literal detail. And so they looked at everything in a very abstract way. And there wasn't a very good way to look at God's word that was written in an idiomatic way, right? So they took something where God's saying, look, what's going to give you peace of mind, what's going to give you stability of mind is knowing the law. And they, instead of understanding that, they stuck a little box on their forehead. They do it to this day. Not all of them, but there's a sect that very much does that. And by the way, it is most likely that Yeshua put the box on his forehead and the straps around his arms. It is very likely that he did this because this came from that group of people. And since he was trained by the Perushim, we know that he was a Pharisee. If for no other reason, we know he was a Pharisee because John the Baptist called him one. When he was speaking to the Pharisees, it says he was speaking to the Pharisees, he said to them, there is one, that one should be a capital O, there is one among you. He was calling Yeshua a Pharisee. Jesus is what he's called by the Christians. Very important that we understand the difference between literal and biblical, because they're not the same thing. If we want stability of mind, if we want to know where we stand with God, we have to get to know the law. Doesn't sound like legalism to me. It sounds like strength. Now, the 13th law is to gain strength from God's laws. I did not do that on purpose. I did not know that was going to be there. Deuteronomy 6:8, and you will bind, it's the same one, it's the same law, and bind and join together and partner with them the laws for a token of guidance, and they will be like a belt between your eyes, right? The words on the hand should not be added to the translation here because it is an idiom. It is important to understand the difference between gaining strength from the laws of God and wearing the laws of God like a red badge of courage. It's two different things. Is it legalistic to wear the law on our hands? Well, let me ask you this. Who do you think knows the law of God better? The man who wears the law on his head and arms, or the Christian who finds the act of wearing the law legalistic? You decide. Yes, wearing the law on our bodies can and often is legalistic, but the mere act of doing so does not make it legalistic. Believing that it is a heaven and hell issue makes it legalistic. The 14th law, to make and to wear fringe in the corners of their outer garments. It comes from Numbers 15:38. Set in order, lead and guide the children of Israel with these words. So it says Amar, I'm sure. It is to light it. Bring it to light that they produce, manufacture, and fabricate fringes in the corners of their garments that they make. Fringes for the corners of their garment. Throughout all generations, in other words, all human beings are commanded to do this that follow after God's law. Throughout all generations, and that they cause a purple thread, it's more of a blue color, to be placed on the fringe in the corner. The zitzit, that's this thing right, the zitziot, plural, this thing here, the fringe, did not have the twists and the knots in them representing the 613 laws, until sometime into just after the 12th century CE, AD if you don't know what CE means. The blue and purple thread in the center was not contingent upon the availability of a particular mussel found in the Mediterranean Sea. God made no such distinction, only that it must be there. Where is the legalism wearing the tzitzit? That's not legalistic, but not wearing them is rebellion against the command of God, isn't it? The command is to wear the fringe. It is not for the Jews. It is for those who are in covenant with God, which was supposed to be the Jews, right? The 15th is to write God's law on your gate and on the doorpost of your home. It's from Deuteronomy 6:9. And you will write and inscribe them, that's God's laws, on the doorposts of your home and on your gates. Now, since the entire Tanakh can be summed up in Deuteronomy 6:5 and Leviticus 19:18, I have engraved these two passages on my gate. Of course, I wrote them in Hebrew. Now, Deuteronomy 6:5 says, and you shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Then in Leviticus 19:18, it says, you shall not avenge or hold a grudge against the children of your people, and you will love your close friend as yourself. I am Yahweh. So I put those two on there, and then I added on the third run something from Levi, which they call Matthew 22:40. It says, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. But I wrote that in English. The 16th law is to gather all believers and everyone living with them together at the end of every 7th year and read the entire law to them. I would think this would be a pretty good witnessing tool, but I still don't see the legalism. The legalism, reading the law once every 7 years is somehow supposed to be legalistic. Deuteronomy 31:12 says, call together the people, men, women, children, and the foreigners within your gates, so that they may hear with their ears, understand with their whole hearts and minds, and act upon what they've heard and understood, and so that they may be trained and tremble for joy in anticipation of Yahweh your God, and keep watch, guard, and tend to all the words, promises, precepts, and royal mandates of this Torah. The mention of the 7th year is in the previous verse, Deuteronomy 31:12. A thorough reading of the laws of God at the end of every 7th year is a sure way to keep it fresh in the minds of God's children. How is that legalistic? Now, on the 17th law, Maimonides said that everybody was supposed to write a copy of the law. But Deuteronomy 19 says, and now write for yourselves a song and teach it through repetition to the children of Israel. Set it as a foundation in their mouths, that this song may be a testimony in the children of Israel. Maimonides was wrong, right? This law is not a command for us to write a copy of the law. Moshe was to write the words of a song. The entire contents of chapter 32 is the song to which God was referring. 32 in Deuteronomy, that is. Let's look at the 18th law. A king will write for himself a copy of the Torah. Well, you wouldn't need that law. If everybody's supposed to do it, then the king's supposed to do it, right? But no, here you actually have a law about the king doing it. It's from Deuteronomy 17:18. And it will come to pass when he is seated on the throne. Now, we'll talk about that. Of his kingdom, he will write a copy of the Torah on a book. What's on a scroll? before the priest and the Levites. So let's talk about while he's seated on his throne. So no, he does not have to sit on a throne and write this scroll. It's while he's seated on his throne is idiomatic. Because think about it. The president does not become a non-president when he goes home at night. Bad example. The current president who's getting ready to leave office, right? He likes to go to Hawaii. So let's say he gets on a plane and goes to Hawaii. Well, he's not in the White House, so he's not the president, right? He's not, right? So, or he goes to France on vacation, so he's not the president anymore. No, he's the president no matter where he is, because he's essentially seated on the throne, right? He has that office. Kings are the same way. They don't become not the king just because they went to another state or another country, or because they're not in actually sitting on the throne. Understand that's idiomatic. So while he is in power, he has to write a copy of the Torah. The kings had to write a copy of the Torah for themselves because they had dominion over the lives of their subjects. It was important that these kings knew what the law was so that they would not make judgments contrary to it. These kings would no doubt need the help of the priests and the Levites to complete this type of a task. So where's the legalism here? Think about how different our nation would be if every president had to write an entire Torah before he made any decisions from the White House. Think what it would be like if all our lawmakers had to do the same. One thing is for sure, we wouldn't have thousands and thousands and thousands of laws added every year, would we? The 19th, and we're getting close to the end here. Bless God for his provision after you eat and are full. Deuteronomy 8:10. And when you have eaten and are satisfied, then you will bless Yahweh, or full, not so much satisfied as full. Then you will bless Yahweh your God for the fertile land which he caused you to receive. Okay, you got to know that's idiomatic, right? Now, but Jesus, he prayed before his meal. No, Yeshua blessed the bread and the wine before the Passover meal. He did that. And he did say a blessing before he created miracles. Yes, he did that. This was done for ceremonial reasons. However, he blessed God for God's provision, which is to bless him for the land is idiomatic for bless God for his provision. He did that according to the scriptures. We should all follow his example. You've got to understand that when Constantine won his war and they began the process of establishing this new religion, that 100 years later would be called Catholicism. It wasn't called that during his lifetime. Now, Catholicism is the Latin word for universal. And they were looking to make a universal religion, to draw all the pagan religions together. So he threatened the people that were still following after the law of God with his army coming and killing them. I mean, it was very subtle, but it's in his law, his letter about Pesach. It helped if you read it in the original language rather than someone's translation, because most of them don't point that out. It's very subtle, but it's there. And so he's telling these people, you drop everything that's Jewish. So since the Jews prayed with their hands up and their face up, standing up, like, by the way George Washington prayed, not as depicted in a picture with him on his knee and head bowed and that kind of nonsense. No. Historically, we know from historical documentation that it's not George Strait. Who is it? Washington. I'm not kidding you. That got in my head and I couldn't think of his name. George Washington prayed just like the Jews did, with his hands toward heaven, his face toward heaven, and he prayed out loud standing. That's the way Jews prayed, right? And they didn't pray. They didn't ask God. They didn't eat their food and say, oh, God, bless the food to my body, to the nourishment of my body, and bless the hands that prepared it. No, he did not. Nobody did that. It wasn't about asking God for anything for us. It was supposed to be a blessing to God. So their words would be, blessed are you, O God, creator of the heavens and the earth. who brings to us bread and brings to us wine, and they always manage to find a way to bring themselves into it. But it wasn't supposed to be that way. It was supposed to say, bless you, Yahweh God, King of the universe, who provided everything his people need. That's a blessing. And that's what we're supposed to do after we eat. But when you're trying to separate yourself from all things Jewish, which is all things biblical, what you do is you bow your head, place your hands together, and do the opposite. Bless us, O Lord. Tell me that's not blasphemy. But it's the Christian way. The 20th, to build a place for Yahweh to dwell among us, which is funny because Yahweh doesn't dwell in places made by man. Anyway, Exodus 25:8. And let them work, produce, manufacture, and fabricate a set-apart, consecrated place that I may settle down, take rest, and abide in the middle of them. The children of Israel built a temple for God to dwell in, but their sin caused that place to be destroyed. Still, the commandment remains. It is important to understand that our bodies are the temple of God to dwell. Let us live upright before him so that sin does not cause the destruction of his dwelling place yet again. We're supposed to build up the temple by living according to God's law. Where's the legalism? Really, is it legalistic to make sure that your heart is pure for God to dwell? And I think the last one I'll go over is the 21st one. To tremble for joy and in reverence in his sanctuary. It's from Leviticus 19:30. You shall watch, guard, tend to, preserve, and observe my Shabbat, my Shabbaton, my Sabbaths. So you'll keep my Sabbaths. And shall tremble in joy and anticipate my sanctuary. I am Yahweh. If you're not keeping the Shabbat, how are you going to tremble for joy and anticipation in the sanctuary? Law number 21 was not to reverence the holy tabernacle. It is to tremble for joy and reverence of Yahweh in the holy tabernacle. Where's the legalism? Living by God's Torah does not fulfill our covenant. It does not get us into heaven. But when Yahweh is our God, the evidence that we are in covenant with him is our obedience to the covenant. In other words, our obedience to God's law. God said, if you love me, you will throw the covenant away, throw the law away, and live by something new, by grace. No, he said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. In the letter of Yohanan, that's the guy they call John, he said, my children, this I write to you so that you do not transgress the Torah. I'm telling you this so that you don't break the law. If anyone transgresses the Torah, we have comfort with the Father Yeshua, the righteous Messiah. Yeah, that's the way it should have been translated. With the Father Yeshua, the righteous Messiah. God said, I am Yahweh, and beside me there is no Mashiach. So if he is the Messiah, then he is the Father Yeshua, the righteous Messiah. And he is the atonement concerning our transgressions of the Torah. Not for ours only, but rather also for the entire world. That's for all of Judea. And in this, we know Yahweh if we keep his commandments. You don't know Yahweh if you don't. And that says, he that says, I know Yahweh, and does not keep his commandments is a liar. A liar. A man who does not keep God's commandments, who says, I live by grace and not the law, is a liar and the truth. is not in him. But whoever obeys Yahweh's words, that's the Torah, by the way, surely in him is the love of God fulfilled. In this we know that we are in him. He that says he dwells in Yahweh ought therefore himself live even as Yahweh lived. He just declared that Yahweh lives according to the law. There is no legalism found in the Torah. God did not give his people a law that could not be followed. God gave us all a standard by which we could live. In other words, the path or way by which we are to follow. Christians are adamant that the Bible teaches them that the law is legalism, bondage, and works. Some, if not most, are completely convinced that they are no longer under the law but under grace. But the phrase, the curse of the law, is used idiomatically in the Bible. The meaning is simple. Those who violate the laws contained in the Torah are subject to the curses. In other words, the punishments laid out by the Torah. Think about it. It works the same way in our world. If the posted speed limit is 65 and you're driving 75, you are living under the curse of that law. Because if you get caught and the police officer pulls you over, what's going to happen? You're going to pay the penalty. He's going to give you a ticket, and it's going to cost you some time and money. The phrase, live by grace, is also used idiomatically and means live by the laws contained in the Torah. Since Christians don't know this, they don't know these are idioms, they have created a whole new religious reality that is virtually impenetrable. The teaching that we are no longer under the law but under grace is true, to the degree that the idiomatic phrase means as long as we live by the laws found in the Torah, we are not under the judgment or curse, but under the grace it gives us to live free from the bondage of the curse. The Bible is a Jewish document written by Jewish men. Those who try to understand its meaning outside the context of Judaism have no shot at understanding any part of it. What about you? Are you willing to stake eternity on doctrine invented in the last 100 years? Or will you stand with the Jewish apostles and live according to the will and covenant of God? Shalom, Beshalom.